baseball game tonight, because that should fall relatively under its field, and if it knows the answer to that, then it can reliably tell me things about what's happening there. That's a good sign. It's not really connected to the magical work, but it's a question of, does this entity have this information? Does it have access to the information, or doesn't it? Which is a very practical way of testing, and it can become, and a lot of people don't test spirits at all, which is difficult to say. I mean, the big thing is, if you are doing ceremonial evocation, it is entirely possible that something will show up that is not actually the entity that you're trying to conjure, because, you know, they'll do that. Like, there are entities that are just looking for a way into our world, and it all depends if you can give them that, and if someone is just impressed by the fact that something is there and something is talking to them, they might not be so inclined to test it, because it seems to be very apparent that it's there, but it's not necessarily the thing that they need to help accomplish the thing that they want to accomplish. So that's an important thing to look at, and I think that that's one of the biggest advantages of this system of magic, is it really forces people to be very practical. It also forces people to build their own equipment and really produce the material aspects of their magic. Just as Goetic magic can produce material things, you need material things to do it. It's not like traveling on the astral plane or scrying sigils or stuff like that. You can do that relatively easily without having consecrated weapons and, you know, enough space for a circle and having decked out, you know, your temple, whatever that might be, in a particular way. Whereas in an evocation, whether it's a Goetic evocation or an evocation of any other spirit, you do need to have that physical space prepared, and that's a big deal. That's a step between ceremonial magic as a fun hobby and ceremonial magic as something you are devoting your resources to, you're devoting your time and energy into. And I think that, like anything else, you get out of something what you put into it, and the more sort of time and energy you invest in these systems, the more you can expect for a result from workings, and a long-term concrete result, as opposed to, you know, something wacky happening that night, which, you know, is easy to settle for, just because we're not used to the idea of that these things are even possible. You know, well, like I said, I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm still not used to the idea that these things are possible. When I see something physically show up in an evocation, it still impresses me. So, you know, that doesn't really get old, I don't think. It's the kind of thing you get bored by. So, what this will kind of bring me back into is this idea of the gap in between the symbol and the symbolized, because we come back to evil as error. This is where a big potential for error exists. I use the word symbol for a particular reason. I mean, you know, just in a very concrete sense, all words are symbols. The words I'm speaking, coming out of my mouth, as symbols. People that I'm talking to know how to translate those symbols and know what they mean when I'm saying them. So that makes it easy. But Crowley tells us, he tells us about the astral plane is that this is the place where symbols are living things. So if there is a gap in between symbols and symbolized, it can't occur in the same way there. There's a sense of getting closer and closer to the next idea, and this is why Crowley wants us to actually practice astral work and work this stuff out. And if we are going to try to transgress our values, overthrow the systems that we've kind of been have had plugged into us, and that's what makes astral work important. And the reason that I bring it up in this context is because as a preliminary to doing this kind of stuff, it is a big deal to have those experiences, to be able to recognize that kind of energy. If people do have any concerns about working with Goetic spirits or demons and stuff like that, it is handy to have that kind of astral travel experience. I mean, if you are dealing with an entity on a Martian plane, you know it's supposed to be a Martian entity, if you do that enough times, sort of start to recognize the feeling of Martian energy in the same way you recognize the smell of muffins, or something like that. The first time you smell it, you might not know what it is. You smell it enough times, you know immediately, and it becomes something you recognize. So when that happens in a ceremonial context, you have an entity in front of you that's supposed to be of a particular nature, a particular type of energy. The question is, well, do you sense that energy? If you're not familiar with it, you wouldn't even know what to look for. So it's really about developing those senses and coming to that kind of recognition, which is why it's not something that can be done a couple of times or every now and then. You know, maybe if you didn't smell muffins for a year, you wouldn't recognize it right away. And it's going to be regular to have that sort of familiarity where you develop those senses in the same way that you would develop any of your other senses. And that's sort of a key precondition. Oh yeah, okay, so here's where I'm going with this. if we take this notion that demons are objective entities and they're out there somewhere and they have wills of their own and they're doing shit, it's very easy to come back to where we started, the idea of human beings are hardwired to find meaning. And if they're trying to find meaning in suffering that's not necessarily there, and you give them this model, then all of a sudden they can start blaming their problems on demons. And now these are running around. So that in itself becomes a dangerous idea, because people can take it and run with it to a crazy place. Which isn't necessarily to say that that doesn't happen or couldn't happen, but I think people need to deal with these things, with mundane things in their mundane life and spiritual things in their spiritual life, and sort of keep that, to a certain extent, separate. I personally, I used the example of doing a ritual for a job before, but personally, if I'm doing magic, I tend to use it for things that I can't get through normal means, or there's something blocking me from getting it through normal means. But it's, this is where the idea of parity comes back in, which is why I think these ideas will never be sort of appreciable to the masses and appeal to everyone, because you're always going to get, if you tell 5 people about this, then you're going to get 4 people who start running off, and now they're afraid of demons everywhere, you know, which is not the desirable way of approaching the system. And I think the thing is that people really need to get out of, it's sort of a combination of trying to promote a sense of individualism without taking the universe personally. You know, if I get hit by a shit wave, it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, I kicked the neighbor's cat and I provoked a shit wave. No, I mean, I was downhill for some shit. Shit rolls downhill. I got hit by a shit wave because I was just downhill for some shit. It's cause and effect. There's no moral quality to it. It doesn't have to be a punishment. But it's very difficult to get out of that, especially when you sort of really have it hammered into you all the time. I mean, you know, I don't want to get too like, ooh, the media is evil, but at the same time, virtually every story that you look at, it has the sense of hubris, where there's a character who does something really impressive and now they have to get punished for it, or if they're really like intense in a certain way, something bad has to happen to them, or they do something bad, they get their comeuppance or whatever. We get this idea tossed at us and tossed at us. It really is coming back to Nietzsche's idea of Christianity. You know, if you do the right thing, you'll get rewarded. If you do the wrong thing, you'll get punished. And that just doesn't really work out practically for anyone other than the person who is holding the other end of the stick, basically. So, do we have any questions here?
How long have you been doing this work?
Goetic work, 13 years. 13 years? Yeah.
When did you start? I mean, that's but prior to that. When did you start your occult studies?
Well, I've been doing. I self-initiated into the AA in 2004, February 2004. I was mostly doing Goetic work before that, some scrying, some astral travel, stuff like that. I got into Thelema and Crowley very slowly after starting to work that system. Honestly, I wasn't invested very deeply in Thelema when I started working the AA system. I just thought it would help me do magic better, which it did, but it also sort of opened up those ideas, and I found that where I found myself in conflict with Crowley, increasingly I was figuring out that I was the one who was wrong, and you know, I shouldn't have been arguing with the guy in the first place. So yeah, but I think that's kind of where my perspective is a little bit different, because a lot of people, if they're into Thelema, they get into Thelema, and ceremonial magic might come later, or might not. Not everyone who is into Thelema does practice ceremonial magic. But having the magical background gave me a very easy way to test these religious ideas. But the question is, if I use these rituals from the system, the spiritual system, is that going to, does that give me more authority on the astral plane, less authority? Does it work? Does it not? And this, I really came to it when I started to mix up the different rituals that I was doing. And I would, do something from the Quran over here. I do read Psalms instead to try and manifest authority. That's the interesting thing about working with the Goetic systems. You get a very profound sense of where is my spiritual authority coming from. And I come back to that idea a lot in occult work, because in any case, if we're trying to get a spirit to show up, we have to have some kind of authority. That's why the Goetia is very hierarchical. Like, you don't just have the demon, you have the demon king, who that demon is in charge of, and then there's the angel that controls that sort of section, and the angel controls that particular demon. And in traditional Goetic working, you'd be expected to make appeals to all of these different entities before you dealt with the actual entity itself, to sort of clear the path. And then there's different ways of manifesting that authority. You don't always have to do it like that. I mean, I've known pagan practitioners use the Goetic system, and they will use their divine commitments to a particular god or a goddess to manifest that authority over the spirit, and that's been effective. I've seen that be very effective for some people and not very effective to other people. But I mean, really, I think what it does is it asks the question, how committed is this person to their belief? I mean, if they just have like